Think about the last time you said something to your child, something completely ordinary, something every parent says, and your child just shut down. Maybe they stopped trying. Maybe they went quiet. Maybe they said, "I can't do it," and you didn't understand why. What if I told you that some of the most common things parents say every day, phrases that sound completely harmless, even encouraging, are slowly, quietly chipping away at your child's confidence? Not because you're a bad parent, not because you don't love them, but because nobody ever told you what these phrases actually do inside a child's developing brain. Today, we're going to change that. I'm going to walk you through 3 specific phrases you have almost certainly used this week, and I'm going to show you exactly what happens in your child's mind when they hear them, and more importantly, what to say instead. Stay with me through all 3, because the third one is the one that surprises parents the most, and it's probably the one you say the most often. Do not forget to subscribe to our channel. Research shows that children form their core self-image between ages 3 and 7, and parental language is the single biggest shaping force during this window. Before we get into the phrases, I want to give you a little context because understanding the why makes the house so much more powerful. Children's brains are not small adult brains. They're completely different machines. The prefrontal cortex, the part responsible for logic, self-regulation, and rational thinking, isn't fully developed until around age 25. That means when your child is 4 or 7 or even 12, they cannot process language the way you do. When you say something to your child, their brain doesn't think. That's constructive feedback. Their brain thinks, "This is information about who I am." Every sentence you say to your child is, to their developing mind, a statement of identity. Not a comment, not a correction, an identity statement. That's why the words we choose matter so much more than we realize. And that's why some completely well-meaning phrases, things parents say out of love and frustration and exhaustion, can quietly wire a child to doubt themselves. So let's get into it. 3 phrases, the science behind each one, and exactly what to say instead. Now, I know, when I say this out loud, most parents immediately think, "I would never say that." But here's the thing. This phrase has 100 disguises. It might sound like, "Your brother never has this problem with homework." It might sound like, "Look how nicely Emma sits still, can you do that?" It might sound like, "When I was your age, I didn't talk back like this." Different words. Same psychological mechanism. Same damage. Because what all of these phrases do, without exception, is teach your child to measure their worth against someone else. And here's what the research tells us about that. Children who are frequently compared to siblings or peers don't become more motivated. They become more anxious, more avoidant, and significantly more likely to develop what psychologists call a fixed mindset, the belief that their abilities are set in stone and cannot be changed. Dr. Carol Dweck, whose decades of research at Stanford University shaped everything we know about mindset, found that comparison-based feedback is one of the fastest ways to destroy a child's intrinsic motivation. Here's what's happening inside your child's brain when they hear comparison. First, they feel shame, not guilt, shame. And there's an important difference. Guilt says, "I did something bad." Shame says, "I am something bad." Shame activates the same threat response in the brain as physical danger. The amygdala fires. Cortisol floods the system. The child goes into survival mode, and in survival mode, learning stops. Growth stops. Connection stops. And here's the cruel irony. The more you compare, the worse the behavior usually gets, because a child in a shame spiral is a child who has stopped believing they're capable of doing better. They stop trying not because they don't care, but because they've decided, at a very deep level, that trying is pointless. That is what one comparison does. Repeated over time, it becomes the story your child tells themselves about who they are. So, what do you say instead? You keep the focus on your child, their own progress, their own effort, their own unique strengths. Instead of, "Why can't you be more like your sister?" Try, "I noticed you worked really hard on that. What felt difficult about it?" Instead of, "Your brother always finishes his dinner." Try, Last week you tried 3 new foods. I was so proud of you for that. The formula is simple. Compare your child to their past self, never to another person. You struggled with reading last month. Look how far you've come. Yesterday this made you really upset. Today you handled it differently. I saw that. That's the kind of comparison that builds confidence, because it shows your child that they are capable of growth, and that you see it. And I want you to really sit with this one because it's going to feel counterintuitive. You're so smart. 3 words. Said with love. Said as a compliment. Said because you are genuinely proud of your child. And it is, according to decades of child psychology research, one of the most quietly damaging things you can say. I know how that sounds. But stay with me. Dr. Carol Dweck, the same researcher from Stanford we mentioned earlier, ran a series of now famous studies where she praised children in 2 different ways after they completed a task. One group was told, "You must be so smart." The other group was told, "You must have worked really hard." Then both groups were given a harder task, and here's where it gets fascinating. The children who are praised for being smart, most of them refuse the harder task. Because if you fail, it means you're not smart anymore. And that's too dangerous a risk. The children praised for effort, over 90% chose the harder task. Because trying hard is something you can always do. Here's the mechanism. When you tell a child they're smart, you are, without meaning to, attaching their identity to a fixed trait. And fixed traits are terrifying to protect. If your identity is, "I am smart," then every difficult task becomes a threat. What if I try and fail? Does that mean I'm not smart? Does that mean I lied? Does that mean people were wrong about me? So the child stops taking risks, stops choosing challenge, avoids anything that might expose them. And here's the painful part. This is most damaging for genuinely gifted children because they have the most to lose. Many highly intelligent children become the most avoidant learners precisely because they've been told their whole lives that intelligence is their defining trait. When learning gets hard, and it always does, eventually they don't have the psychological scaffolding to cope with struggle. Nobody taught them that struggle is part of the process. So they stop. And they tell themselves they're not that smart after all. The fix here is what Carol Dweck calls process praise, praising the effort, the strategy, the persistence, not the outcome and not the trait. Instead of, "You're so smart. Try. You kept going even when it got hard. That's what I love to see." Instead of, "You're so talented at drawing. Try. You've been practicing every day, and look at how your drawings have changed." Instead of, "You got an A, you're brilliant. Try. You studied for 3 nights for that test." The grade reflects all that work. What you're doing is teaching your child that outcomes come from process, not from a magic quality they either have or don't have. That is a child who will try harder things. A child who will recover from failure. A child who believes that effort matters. That is confidence that lasts. Phrase number 3. And this is the one I told you about at the beginning, the one that surprises parents the most. Stop crying. You're fine. Or, it's close relatives. You're being dramatic. That didn't even hurt. There's nothing to be sad about. Big kids don't cry. Stop being so sensitive. These phrases feel like comfort. They feel like reassurance. They feel like you're helping your child calm down, pulling them back from the edge of overwhelm. But here's what they actually communicate to a child's brain. Your feelings are wrong. Your feelings are too much. Your feelings are not safe to show. And a child who learns that their feelings are not safe to show does not stop having feelings. They stop sharing them. With you. With others. And most dangerously, with themselves. Emotional regulation, the ability to manage and process emotions, is now recognized as one of the single most important skills a child can develop. More predictive of long-term well-being than academic achievement. more predictive of relationship success than IQ. The research on this is overwhelming and consistent. And emotional regulation is not something children are born with. It's something they learn primarily through a process called co-regulation. Co-regulation is what happens when a calm, connected adult stays present with a child during emotional distress. The child's nervous system literally learns to regulate by borrowing the calmness of the adult. That is how emotional intelligence develops. That is the actual biological mechanism. When we say, "Stop crying, you're fine," we interrupt that process. We send the child the message that their distress is inconvenient, that they need to manage it alone. That emotional expression leads to rejection, not connection. Over time, children who receive this message consistently develop what researchers call emotional suppression. They become the child who never seems bothered by anything, the child who says, "I'm fine," even when they're not. And those are the children we should be most worried about because they've learned to bury what they feel, not process it. Buried emotions don't disappear. They surface later, as anxiety, as anger, as an inability to connect in relationships as adults. This one is the hardest shift because it requires something from us as parents that we often don't have in that moment. It requires us to stay, not to fix, not to rush, not to reassure them out of their feelings, just to stay. Instead of, "Stop crying, you're fine," try, "I can see you're really upset. I'm right here." Instead of, "That didn't even hurt," try, "Ouch, that looked like it really hurt. Let me see." Instead of, "Stop being so sensitive," try, "You feel things deeply, that's actually a strength. Let's figure this out together." You don't have to understand why they're crying. You don't have to agree that it's a big deal. You just have to let them know, your feelings are real, your feelings are safe here, and you are not alone in them. That is the single most powerful thing a parent can say to a child who is struggling. Not "you're fine," but "I'm here." Those two words, "I'm here," do more for a child's long-term emotional confidence than almost anything else you will ever say. So, 3 phrases. 3 patterns. 3 quiet ways that language, used without awareness, can slowly chip away at a child's sense of themselves. Comparisons that teach them their worth is relative. Praise that ties their identity to a fixed trait. Dismissals that teach them their feelings are too much. None of these phrases come from a place of cruelty. Every single one of them comes from a place of love, from exhausted, overwhelmed parents doing the very best they can with the tools they were given. Most of us were raised hearing these phrases. They were wired into us before we had any say in the matter. So this is not about guilt. This is not about adding another thing to the list of ways you're failing. This is about awareness. Because once you see it, really see it, you can change it. And every time you catch yourself and choose a different response, you are literally rewiring the relationship between you and your child. One conversation at a time. I want to leave you with something practical before you go. This week, just this week, pick one of these 3 phrases. Just one. And every time you feel it rising in your throat, pause for 3 seconds and try the alternative instead. You don't have to be perfect. You don't have to get it right every time. Parenting isn't about perfection. It's about pattern. And the pattern you're building, the fact that you watched this video, that you want to understand your child's inner world, that already says everything about the kind of parent you are. If this helped you, do well to subscribe, like, and share it with another parent who needs to hear it. Because the more parents understand how language shapes a child's confidence, the better we all become at this. I'll see you in the next one. And until then, you're doing better than you think.